Hello and welcome to Diminishing Returns. We're here again, and joining me, Alan, as always, is Sol.
Hello, Alan.
Hello. We have a very special guest, Sol.
Yeah, joining the two of us is a really, really special guest this week. The one, the only, Allie Goertz.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us, Allie.
I'm excited. This seems like a lot of fun. But we'll see about that.
I
say that
now. And this week we are covering the second film, I think, from Wes Anderson, Rushmore.
It is amazingly, we're nearly 5 years into doing this podcast and never done a Wes Anderson film at all. We've done 7 Paul W.S. Anderson films. So, Ali, was it you who chose Rushmore for our little chat?
Yes. It was suggested maybe that we would talk about the Simpsons movie, which I also think is very fun. To those who don't know me, I have a Simpsons podcast and write songs about the Simpsons, and I have a Simpsons book that I co-wrote with my co-host Julia. But sometimes you need a little break from the Yellow family we all love. And Rushmore, it's one of my very favorite movies ever. I feel like it is similar to The Simpsons in that if someone says they love The Simpsons, 2 through 8, and if someone says they love Rushmore, I feel immediately, without fail, we're going to get along, or at the very least have a very entertaining chat.
That's a really good comparison that you've drawn there, actually, because the Simpsons we've spoken about it on this show practically in every episode. It always seems to come up. There's always a quote that matches something we're trying to talk about. But I think The Simpsons, for certainly people roughly kind of our generation, it's something very formative and it means a lot more to people than it necessarily would if they were to just watch it now for the first time.
Yeah.
And watching Rushmore, which I actually did for the first time about a week before I think we decided we were going to do it on this podcast, funnily enough. And so then I watched it again yesterday just to refresh my memory. But it really struck me like, this is one of those films that if you see it at the right point in your life, it could just be this completely formative experience that sets in stone all sorts of things of your comedic sensibility and thoughts on life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really curious what it would feel like to someone who hadn't grown up with it. So I'm sure we'll be getting into that. But just very briefly, I saw it in theaters and I was 7 years old. And so for me, that's pretty early to watch a movie that's, not animated. But even as a kid, I just thought that Max Fisher was like the coolest, like Bart Simpson-y type of guy. I just thought, even though he's an overachiever, he's still a failed student and in a lot of ways has that Bart type of like doesn't care about authority type of thing that I think is really appealing as a kid or as a teenager. But every time I watch it, I kind of go back to that feeling of youth that I wonder what it's like as an adult to be watching it. So I'm very curious.
I mean, obviously, I knew, Ellie, that you were a Simpsons nerd, dare I say.
How dare you?
And obviously, I get enough of that with Sol every week. So I'm having it in stereo this week. I was having a little bet with myself how long it would take for someone to bring up The Simpsons. Okay, so if I can just, I'll take us back to Wes Anderson then. Rushmore, yes, was Wes Anderson's second film. So his first film, Bottle Rocket, was a bit more of an indie little thing. So this was his sophomore effort, I believe the term is, where a chance to prove himself. And it's amazing how much of that Wes Anderson style is there already.
Oh, yeah. I do struggle a bit with Wes Anderson because I want to make it clear that I do like his films. I don't think there's any of his films that I dislike, but I do think that he's very firmly in the territory of self-parody, certainly at the moment, and I think he knows he's doing it. I don't think it's even like necessarily a problem, but it was just weird going back to see Rushmore and all that style and the kind of the cliches of what he does was there, but it all kind of really worked for me here. Like I couldn't criticize it, and I guess that's because it was so early on that it hadn't become this thing that he does in every film, the 90-degree angles and the framing and casting the same people again and again. It was the first time he'd worked with Bill Murray. In fact, this really not relaunched Bill Murray's career, but kind of gave his career a new life, doing like indie films, didn't it? I understand. Yeah.
I mean, in some ways it was a little bit of a come back from what I understood of it, just because you have Bill Murray, the comedian, and then you get, pre Lost in Translation, like serious actor man. You get this guy who's willing to do the movie for, he like did it for scale.
I imagine the amount of money he got to do like Garfield, for example, where he just had to turn up to a voice booth in his pajamas was, at least 10 times what he got paid, probably more.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of having a bit of money in the bank, isn't it? You can pick and choose your things, what you want to do for your own pleasure.
But yeah, this really, it is, like you say, it's remarkable. This really does just establish that Wes Anderson film. Like, it's all there. And I have seen Bottle Rocket, but I don't remember being struck by how, it was just a Wes Anderson film in the same way that this is. Down to the cast, you've got the two of the Wilson brothers are in there. I didn't see Owen anywhere on screen, but obviously he wrote it, and with Wes Anderson.
Owen Wilson he plays like the photo, or he's like the photo of the ex, like Rosemary's ex-husband who's dead, or the dead husband, but he's uncredited.
Yes.
And there's obviously a lot of Wes Anderson in the writing of the film, and I think the character of Max seems to pretty much be, if not Wes Anderson, kind of what he wishes he were, like himself, but with a bit of confidence, is kind of the impression I get. That, like, him as an extrovert.
Well, that was interesting, because when I was watching this, the impression I was getting was like, imagine if you, like, now were taken back to being 15 again, and like you just have that certain confidence, but also a kind of like, well, I'm not just going to do what you tell me, because you're a teacher. That, like, what? Who cares? And I think there was an element to that. And then, of course, the song over the end credits is, I wish I knew what I know now when I was younger.
Yeah.
When I was younger.
Yeah. So that is like, that came across just from watching it. And as much as I don't think I would have been as much of a knob as Max Fisher is, I would be such a different person, like, going back now into that sort of situation. And that's what I feel like this film is tapping into. But also the whole the character journey is a sort of emotional, it's a coming of age story, really, of him learning about, the complex emotions of those adolescent years. And Sol will know this, but I do like a film where nothing really happens. And it's just kind of a character journey. But this film only just gets away from it. And I think I'm sort of on a similar wavelength with you, Sol, here. Like, I do like Wes Anderson films, but I've never loved one of them. It's one I haven't had that one that's just like chimed with me on an emotional level. And also, the more you watch, the more you go, it's like, all right, yeah, okay, it's the same film again. It's another Wes Anderson film. And I think this is probably the closest I'm going to get to having an emotional connection with it. That kind of awkward adolescent phase we all went through,
Yeah, I've never really clicked with Wes Anderson in the way where I'm like, I love this so much, it's my favourite thing. I just kind of think like, yeah, this is cool. I don't know, this one really did, it felt like one of his best films to me, because I think, like I say, it was all there, what he does, but it was still fresh. It wasn't kind of like, okay, I've seen this kind of father-son dynamic from Wes Anderson many, many times at this point.
I love The Royal Tenenbaums, and I think it's a really amazing and unique movie. But I love this movie because it just feels so genuine, and it just feels, it's not. Of course, his style comes through, and he's still part of that is that he's still in the process of like figuring out his style. Yeah. But I loved. It just felt very much just like a filmmaker, rather than someone who's just like, all right, time to make my movie. That it felt very, very raw.
Yeah, I do wish that I would have been in a position in 1997 to have been watching this sort of as it went out, and it was like, because I think I would have been really excited, like, wow, this is very interesting, an exciting new young filmmaker. But yeah, like 20 years later, it's like, oh, it's a Wes Anderson film, isn't it? You're like, I know what to expect.
Yeah. Another career who I think is similar, but to an even larger extent than Wes Anderson, is Tim Burton. I think that Tim Burton's earliest movies, especially like Pee-wee and Edward Scissorhands, they're so fun and they're so cheap. And if you listen to the commentary, of like Pee-wee and Edward Scissorhands, they'll talk about how they used duct tape for certain mechanical items, or how they were using the same house would double as like 5 different things, and everyone was just kind of coming together to make this project come to life. And in some ways, there's almost a curse to having all the money at your disposal and having all of the things that you could ever dream of, because there is something really cool about kind of this early stage of filmmaking where people are having to get scrappy and creative, and the love for what they are making really is first and foremost.
We call it George Lucasing, I think, on this podcast, where you sort of make something that, you know, is putting your vision out there, but then you become so successful that no one dares look over your shoulder and give you notes anymore, and perhaps it's to your detriment a bit. And that's not
a great point.
Yeah, and it's not to say that, you know, like I say, I still like Wes Anderson's films now. I'm not saying that he's, you know, Tim Burton was, or arguably still is, one of my favorite filmmakers, but his last few films have been very questionable, I think. Whereas, you know, Wes Anderson, I kind of know what I'm getting. It's just it doesn't have that same spark that I think I got here. But I do wonder if that's because so much of this seems to be almost Owen Wilson's kind of voice as well. Because obviously he co-wrote the film, I believe, and I was just reading up before how apparently he went to a really highfalutin school. All the Wilson brothers did. Apparently Luke Wilson's the only one who graduated. Yeah, so I just sort of thought, like, okay, so there's obviously a lot of his personal experiences of going to this school and, you know, not quite clicking with it here, and yeah, I just wondered if it was that mixture of both of their voices being very sincere, I guess.
Yeah, and Owen Wilson is also just extremely funny. Like, one of the reasons Rushmore is my favorite Wes Anderson movie, although it really is a close tie between Royal Tenenbaums, because I really think that's a work of genius. But again, keep in mind, I saw that movie when I was 13. So these movies are really formative for me. And I also was watching them, with Royal Tenenbaums in particular, I was watching it in the midst of, like, Paris Hilton and, like, the VH1 America, very, like, everyone was plastic and blonde and hated intellect, and George Bush was president. And so a lot of it is like, it's such an amazing departure from what the world looks like in this very flashy, gaudy, negative, awful place. Like, to see a movie where people are speaking in a way that it's clear that their intellect and what they read is important, to the point where it became snobbish. Like, it was still very comforting and very a nice break from the real world, I think. And it is important, I think, and I'm sure this comes up all the time on the podcast, like, when kind of reviewing a movie, of just kind of thinking about, like, well, what was the climate at the time, and why did this matter to people? Like, if I had known other kids who liked Rushmore, I would have had my mind blown. Like, I definitely didn't know anyone else who had even heard of it. I said, like, I just saw Rushmore. And they're like, yeah, Rush Hour is great. Like, all right. And it is. It's just very different.
There's something quite, especially when you're younger, something really cool about finding something that chimes with you and nobody else knows about it. Usually it's music, isn't it? Some unknown band that you get introduced to, and there's always something like that. And I think for me that came through film as well, and I got a lot of influence. My brother's about 10 years older than me, so I had all these influences from him that were 10 years kind of out of my generation, and so none of my friends knew about them, and so that's why I have sort of slightly outdated tastes. Like, my tastes.
I relate to you, Alan. I relate to you. My sisters, I have half sisters who are like 10 and 13 years older than I am, and then I have a very young dad. So my dad is 20 years older than I am, and so my mom is 35 years older than I am, and so I have all of the different kind of tastes happening at that time too. And very briefly, just because I think it might set up the context a little bit, I was raised to be a snob through and through. And my parents, my dad specifically, raised me in a way that was like, I'm allowed to watch anything in terms of maturity level. We would just have to have a conversation about what it was that we were watching. But I'm not allowed to watch things that he considered not well written. And so I basically I grew up, my favorite band of course was the Beatles, and all the 60s and British invasion stuff that's in this movie I had already always loved. Like, I love the Kinks and I love that era of music, but I was not allowed to listen to like Britney Spears or NSYNC and Backstreet Boys because my dad just thought it was bad music. And so of course now that I'm an adult, I kind of like it. I thought it was pretty funny.
Now you've rebelled.
My mum tried to do the same thing with me to an extent, where she certainly would try and show me, worthy films and things that might educate me on a certain level, but it never quite worked. I remember when she showed me Schindler's List was on TV, and I was about 7 or 8 years old, and she was like, "Oh, you're going to watch Schindler's List. It's incredibly important that you see, what happened." And we got to like the third person being shot in the head, and she was like, "No, it's horrible." And just
Garfield
turned it off.
on.
Exactly. It's a little young.
So yeah, it was the right idea, but yeah, and at that age, I was far too young to appreciate the film anyway. I didn't watch it again until last year or the year before, and I loved it. But when I was 7 or 8, I was like, "What's this black and white thing?"
Also, what is war? There's a lot of stuff to unpack there as a child.
Yeah. But no, I think it's a good approach, except that what if your child rebels against that? Because that's very common, isn't it? And then suddenly you've got a kid who's going out of their way to listen to there's worse music than Britney Spears. I don't mind a bit of Britney.
Oh, sure.
Here and there, but yeah,
free Britney.
Yeah.
Can I give you an impromptu Wes Anderson little quiz here?
Oh,
sure.
yeah.
Let's test your knowledge, Allie. So I was just looking at Wes Anderson earlier, and he's been Oscar nominated 7 times.
Wow.
But never won. But can you tell me what he's been nominated for? He's been nominated in 4 different categories.
Gosh, I've never really known what the different categories often are. I assume that screenplay would be at least one of them.
Yeah, he's got 3 for original screenplay. That's Royal Tenenbaums, Moonrise Kingdom, and Grand Budapest Hotel.
Yeah, and then since he's a director, I would imagine that he would be nominated for directing. Yeah. And I feel like Budapest would have gotten some type of award.
Yes.
Budapest was up for Best Picture, was it? So I guess, did he produce that?
He was a named producer, so he was nominated as Best Picture, but also Best Director for Grand Budapest Hotel.
And animated film.
Best animated feature.
Mr. Fox, yeah.
Yes.
And Isle of Dogs, I think.
Yes,
oh, yeah, you're right,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well done. You passed the test.
I passed. I'm a real fan. In 9th grade, so first year of high school for us, we had to do an assignment of like, who is your hero? And I put Wes Anderson as my hero, which was a very bizarre choice because most people were picking, like actual heroic people. And I had this very Wes Anderson looking presentation with the very Wes Anderson-y colors. And the only movies that had come out at that point were up until Royal Tenenbaums. So I felt like I was kind of smart for even being able to pick up on the different color motifs that he would have in each of his movies and whatnot. But that's the thing, like, when you're so stylized, it's almost too bad because unless you are completely reinventing yourself, something that you love then becomes predictable and seen as like, oh, it's just him doing his thing. And it's a little sad in a way because it's like, the Ramones never changed, a lot of things, it's just, they're just doing their style. And even I can sometimes think a little bit like, oh, of course, that's Wes Anderson. But because I love that style, I don't tend to get too annoyed by it. And I actually really like when people do parodies of him. It's pretty easy to do, so I quite like it. But yeah, to the point of this movie and what makes it special, I really do think that Owen Wilson did play a big part in it. Some of the lines, and Bill Murray did too, because he's such a funny improvisational person. A lot of improv is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. He's just so naturally funny and just brought a depth, and Jason Schwartzman, this is his like breakout role, even though he's a Coppola, which I actually know I know of a few people who auditioned for Max because it was a huge casting call.
Oh, really?
And I know a lot of people who hate Rushmore because they auditioned and they didn't get it. And everyone was so mad. As you could imagine, so many young actors were going after this part. And to find out that it went to a Coppola, it was it felt like the most like insidery kind of bullshit. But he's so good.
Yeah, I must admit, I was thinking that. I looked him up earlier because I was like, where did Jason Schwartzman like come from before this? And this is his first credit, at least on IMDb. And And obviously he's only 17 or whatever, so it's fair enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did sort of assume, well, he's in that world. They probably all went to school together or something. Like they're all just living Hollywood somewhere. But obviously that's not the case with the Wilsons.
I did find it really odd, though, because I was sort of thinking of, on this podcast, we, at least in theory, try and kind of pitch sequel ideas at times and, what you might do for a follow-up film. And I was thinking I'm going to be really smart, because I thought, Jason Schwartzman, he's in all of Wes Anderson's films, isn't he? Is there a way I could just kind of, reposition all the other Wes Anderson's films as being the same character with a few tweaks and do something like that? But I didn't realise he didn't work with Wes Anderson again until the Darjeeling Limited. There's this big kind of gap where they, I think, kind of did their own thing. But certainly from Darjeeling Limited onwards, he's been in pretty much every one, I think. So, yeah, I don't know. There's this curious gap in their filmographies, and I couldn't find anything to suggest they fell out or anything like that. I think they just maybe went to do their own thing for a bit.
In terms of a sequel, that is a sequel that if I heard that was going to happen, I would immediately be trying to either be a part of it or just see it opening night. I just love the idea because the character of Max is so fun, and I really could see that being like an HBO series, just like this. It feels very now in a lot of ways, of just this kind of precocious 15-year. I mean, you look at shows like Riverdale and other things that have the same type of ideas, but with a lot less nuance and humor. I can't tell if Max would be someone who got way worse with age, or if Max would be someone who became like a really mature type of young man. I really could see it either way.
That. Yeah, I was really thinking, because the thing to do would be, pick up with him now, see where he's gone in life, and I think there's a lot of room to actually do that if they ever did feel so inclined. But I just couldn't figure it out at all. I couldn't figure out, would he go one way, would he go this way? And I mean, for anyone who's listening who hasn't seen Rushmore, broadly speaking, it's about this. He's an odd character, because I was going to call him an overachiever there, but he isn't an overachiever, and that's kind of the point. He's very clearly quite intelligent, but applies it in. He's at this very, very posh school, and he is really into the extracurricular side of things, but he's not very good in his studies, and he's a playwright, and that seems to be why they put up with him to the extent that they do, because he writes these brilliant plays that, get put on and everyone likes. And then the film becomes a kind of love triangle of sorts, where he is, or believes he's in love with his one of his teachers at the school. Is she a teacher there? She is, isn't she?
Yeah. She teaches first grade, so not his teacher, but a teacher.
Right. And Bill Murray is, also having an affair with this teacher at the school, and is in love with her, and she seems to be in love with him, and so it's a whole sort of messy love. Is that even a love triangle, or like a love tetrahedron?
I definitely got the impression from this character. I think as it went along, you do like him at first, but I started to dislike him more and more, because he is like, he's not achieving academically at the level he's sort of expected to be at this particular school. And everything he does, all the extracurricular activity, it's not because that's how he channels his energy. It's a decoy technique. It's just, it's him going, oh, don't look at my grades. Look at this that I'm doing. Look at this. And it allows him to be the boss. If he sets up a society, he's the founding member. He can be in charge, which is what he really likes. And to some extent, this film is him channeling that into a way that is slightly more productive. And all I could see is him, like, he's going to be a politician. This guy's going to go into politics. But not just that, he's going to be the politician who is like, we need to get rid of real politicians and have normal people like me. Oh, I went to, my dad's a barber. Don't mention that I went to a posh school.
Yeah, there is a world in which he's a taxi driver type of menace to society, just a terrifying everything. We need to destroy it all from the inside.
So I think he'd either rise up the ranks and become, an awful CEO of a company that's just a nightmare to work for, or he'd, wouldn't have the same level of success, and he'd probably be a kind of CEO of his own little one-man company, but trying to scrape things together and make a big
But yeah, he'd be the
show of himself. Yeah,
he's the sort of guy who, like, it'd be the producer of a film company or a theatre company or something, and he's really good at going into someone's office and going, "Hey, look, here's what we're doing. This is what we're doing. Hey, do you want to give us some money?" Really good at getting money, but then when it comes to actually being creative, he delivers this script, and everyone's like, "This script is crap. Like, what, do we say anything?" Because the extracts we see of his plays are kind of deliberately cliched and comedic.
I never knew how to feel about that, because I got the impression that the film was trying to say these are great plays, but they are obviously funny because they're so ridiculously over the top to be watching, high school kids performing, Vietnam drama on the stage with pyrotechnics and everything.
I never got the impression that the plays are particularly good. I think it really is more capturing the accuracy of that, like, these little prodigy attitude children actually aren't even all that good. I don't think he's supposed to be bad. I think it's supposed to just be, well, one, it's not really entertaining to watch someone put on a good play because art is subjective anyway. For example, I was watching Dead Poets Society, and there's a scene in which you see the main character, who's always been afraid to act, and he's in a play, and you're watching it, and, like, I can't tell if it's good, but everyone in the audience is saying, like, "Oh, he's so good. This is really good acting." And so unless they had been telling me that it's good acting, I never would have known, and in fact I would have assumed it was bad.
we did that with, was it Citizen Kane?
No, we had this problem with soul, and in fact anything that involves jazz music.
Oh,
we can't tell the difference between good jazz and bad jazz.
Yeah.
The same with La La Land. It's like,
yeah, we had it with Citizen Kane when we did that recently with the is she an opera singer?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
His wife that he's kind of training up, and it was like, is that bad? Or but then everyone starts saying, "Oh, she's terrible." And it's like, okay, I wouldn't have known.
Okay,
it sounded
just making
fine
sure. Yeah. As a musician myself, I always have the hardest time when what I am seeing and listening to with my own ears is bad, and they are telling me it's good. But you have, plot wise, you just have to go with it. You have to suspend belief and say, all right, she's good. But something I find funny about the plays that are in both Rushmore and Royal Tenenbaums, because both feature Margot Tenenbaum, you have a flashback of her doing her little performances. They're just what a kid would come up with, like what a 15-year-old, like, the fact that a 15-year-old is doing a Vietnam War play is so funny, because what the hell does he know about it? It's so funny to me. It's very precocious, and it really speaks to that kind of kid who just thinks that they know everything and just feels like such an adult trapped in this weird time. I mean, I relate to Max so much. I've never seen a character more like myself than Max. And
is that something you want to admit to?
I get away with it because I'm a woman. I genuinely think that's the only difference. But no, the difference is that I have some awareness of my flaws, whereas Max really revels in them. But I really think that it's just such a little subgenre of these little actors who are so weird and kind of hated, but also beloved in their own weird way. But what I love about the movie is that you get him in this setting, this weird, unique setting that most people have never experienced, of this private school. And then he gets expelled, and he has to kind of make do in this public school setting. And I went to public school. I certainly relate to what it's like to kind of feel suddenly like, oh, wow, I just don't even know what to do if no one's giving me, like, awards. Like, I'm just a person. And he actually, in a way, he grows at the end of the movie, because he ends up finding this kind of age-appropriate match with a student, this Margaret character. I thought that was like a little moment of growth that I loved, which gave me some hope for his future, that he might not become a politician.
Well, that's it. Yeah, so at one point in the film, sort of the second act really is him getting expelled from the posh school, and he has to go to the crappy public school. And the obvious thing to do there would be to have him as the sort of fish out of water, and he really struggles. And he doesn't really. He finds because he has this confidence, he just finds his place straight away. And sure, there's people who don't like him, but he just finds the people who will do what he says, and he gets on with it.
Well, I think that one of the things I like so much about the movie is kind of this idea that we're touching upon, which is like when you are 15 and when you are making these pieces of art that adults can recognize is kind of bad, you believe in it full-heartedly and you think you're so smart and you think you're so wise. And to be fair, you're the smartest you've ever been in your life. You have never been smarter than you are right now. So why wouldn't you think that you're a genius? And so I guess that full-fledged, I saved Latin, what did you do? I wrote a hit play is the most cringy and relatable thing I've ever seen. This idea of like, I am God's gift is like such a relatable thing but for me, I have a lot of stuff that's online. So there was a thing called Yahoo Answers, which was kind of before there were a lot of other forums like Reddit. People would just ask questions and then the community would answer. And the best answer, quote unquote, would get points. And it was this weird point system that meant nothing, much like Reddit. And so I was at the time 15, going through my parents' divorce, like having a very lonely summer, but just spent all my time online answering questions. And just most of the questions were like people asking Beatles trivia. And I guess even though it was online, we were all doing the honor code of like, I'm not cheating and like Googling this. And I look at the questions I would ask, some of which were like, who wants to be friends with me? And it would just be a little kind of advert for me of just like, I like old music. I'm an old soul. I'm very mature for my age. I've got fantastic taste, blah, blah, blah. And it's just the most sincere and for that reason, embarrassing thing in the world. And it would be so easy for me to delete it because there are buttons to do that. But at the same time, I kind of like having this little ode to my 15-year-old self by keeping it up to kind of remind myself, like, because if I didn't have it, it would be really easy for me to think of myself as being cooler than I was. But when I read it, I'm like, oh my God, I was in so much pain and agony and I was just such a helpless little person. And even if I read emails from a year ago, I'm like, oh, I can't believe how horribly I wrote this email. And I, to be fair, I do think that's better than reading something from the past and thinking I've never been as funny and I will never be as funny. Like it, yeah. I'd rather grow, certainly. Yeah. But yeah, I just have such a nostalgia for this, for these types of movies. And I think that even maybe for someone who hasn't grown up with the movies, that you kind of get the sense of nostalgia that is injected into them from Wes Anderson and Owen Wilson's own lives. Like you're getting that sense of like, gosh, being 15 was so weird. And and I just love that. And really quickly, I want to say a quote that Bill Murray had. Something that he said about the script was that he thought it was about this. He said, the struggle to retain civility and kindness in the face of extraordinary pain. And I felt that all my life. And I do think that is one of the things that's so cool about the movie, of like, you get this weird like fight between Bill Murray and Jason Schwartzman's characters, even though one of them is an adult and one of them is a child. But they are just making each other so mad, and they're having to find a way to like somehow not enact all of their rage and fury, which is a very hard thing to do in life. And I think that the movie is very fun for that reason.
The relationship between Bloom and Max Fisher is like 15-year-olds. If anything, it's that the Bill Murray character is quite immature, and it is in that way that when you were a teenager you would fall out over, like, because you both fancied the same girl, and then you would hate each other for 3 months, and then you'd be like, oh, we're mates again, yeah, all right. Or, you know, especially with boys, you might have a bit of a fight that gets broken up after like 2 punches are thrown, and then it's like, oh yeah, we're friends again now. It's like honor is served. Like, we can be friends. I think that is the dynamic at work here. It's just because obviously one of them is Bill Murray, it just seems a bit more quirky.
It's a great point. Yeah. I've at the time when Moonrise Kingdom came out, I was so excited for it because I was such a huge Wes Anderson fan, and I really did not like that movie, which I think is shocking to a lot of people who know me. And my takeaway was that I like Wes Anderson movies that are about immature adults, not really mature children. And I just felt really uneasy with these like prepubescent children being adults. I didn't like it. But I love Max because he's in that weird in-between area where it's kind of like, I mean, legally he is a child, but in terms of like kind of that little in-between area, I feel like it's so, almost every Wes Anderson character, aside from Moonrise Kingdom, feels like they're 15 to me in terms of their emotional maturity.
Well, that's the secret to it, really, isn't it? Because he certainly thinks he's mature. He's like, yeah, like you are when you're a teenager,
Yeah.
like, I know everything. But he's really not, and he's particularly emotionally immature, which is what this film explores, and discovering love and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I love the scene with Luke Wilson.
Are they? That's
where
my favorite line of any movie.
I like your nurse's uniform, guy.
These are OR scrubs.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, where he has a drink and just, you know, gets very rude and then tries to apologize for his drink in another scene later on, but it's for the fact that he had a drink and kind of, you know, lost his temper. But it's all so emotionally immature, like you say.
Yeah, but he thinks maturity is writing a beautifully penned letter apologizing for your behavior. That's maturity. Look how mature I am to be able to acknowledge that I've been wrong. But on that same issue, I think Olivia Williams as Miss Cross, who is the sort of love interest for the love triangle, is much more emotionally mature and has obviously suffered for her emotions. And having that heart between the two of them is really good, because she kind of knows how to handle them, but then she's still making mistakes, as we all do all the time. No matter how old you get, you still mess up relationships and you still kind of ruin things. I thought, not just a great character, but a really great performance. I think Olivia Williams is my favourite thing in the film.
Incredible.
Because I think with Jason Schwartzman and Bill Murray, there is a sort of layer of irony to their acting, which works for the style. But Olivia Williams is sort of straight down the line. This is some top-notch acting.
Well, talking about the acting, someone we haven't mentioned yet, Brian Cox is also in this film.
Yeah, I love a bit of Brian Cox.
I've really, really grown to love Brian Cox.
But this was an era.
Recently,
there was about 6 or 7 years when he was just in everything.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, of course, as I say, Luke Wilson, who's excellent in this. Again, I've really grown to appreciate Luke Wilson. Like, when I was younger, he always seemed like the Wilson you get when you can't afford Owen Wilson, the kind of bargain bin
discount
one. But now
he's phenomenal.
I really like Luke Wilson. I don't know which Wilson's my favourite. I like them all.
The good thing is you don't have to choose.
Exactly.
There was definitely there was a real discount Wilson in this film, playing like a PE teacher or something. You could tell he was a Wilson, but I don't...
Oh,
he was
right.
like that spare
Andrew
Hemsworth
Wilson,
thing.
yeah. We spoke about him in... oh, God, what was it? We have spoken about him before on this podcast, because I was amazed to learn there was a third Wilson, and I didn't know about it until he popped up in another film we did. Was it Charlie's Angels?
Oh, I can't remember.
I think it was Charlie's Angels.
Well, just while we talk about actors, Seymour Cassel as his dad, I think is really great. Very simple performance, but right.
Yeah,
for
you're
what
right,
he is.
actually.
But
Yeah,
also the relationship with his dad, the fact that his mother's dead, I think that is played really nicely as well, because that again, you could easily fall into a stereotype of this kid who's kind of overachieving for his background, as in he's gone to the posh school and everything, but he still really respects his dad, and even though, like, you know, in certain circles he might lie about what he does, but he respects that his dad is doing a good job. And I liked the bit where he went back and just sort of like, well, I'm gonna work with my dad. It didn't feel like, well, I've failed, so I'm going into the family business. It felt like, well, I've failed at this, so I'm gonna try this now, and this is a perfectly respectable thing to do as well. And then the dad just seems to be the perfect encouragement without pushing, just like, hey, do your best.
Yeah.
Are you sure this is what you want to be doing? All that. I really like that. Really kind of that beautiful father figure in that.
Very modest and humble. Yeah, briefly, just to talk a little bit more about Rosemary, the teacher, I really love that casting choice too, because the movie would have been so different if, and granted, she's stunning, but she's not what you think of when you think of, okay, 15-year-old boy is in love with a teacher. I would picture Van Halen, hot for teacher type of, like, super, you know, bombastic, just bombshell looks. And it's much more than sex. Like, it's really like, and in some ways it could be missing a mother figure. It could be a lot of things, but I love that she's this just very classy and mature intellectual who makes him feel smarter. And I think that's what I connect to so much too.
I hadn't really thought of it as that kind of, you wouldn't think it like that. But it's because in the film, he finds her through this intellectual route of like this book, this sort of shared interest. And so it's not like he sees her across the room and is like, oh my God, it was never that. So
never.
It never even occurred to me really. But you're right. Yeah, it's something that you could kind of, the obvious route would be totally different. And I guess that's Wes Anderson, isn't it? It's not really the obvious route.
And then the last thing I'll say is just that even though I could see a sequel going any direction with Max, that my hope, if I ever read about a sequel, is that Max is the good guy that I think he could become, because I think that people who have these types of childhoods, they really learn a lot. I certainly have. And I think that it's a more optimistic world if Max Fisher gets to end up being a pretty good guy in the end. So I'll leave on a bit of optimism.
I think that's a fair point, though, because, you know, the main thing I kind of took from this film is that it's just really nice. And
it would be, it's comforting.
It would feel weird if it wasn't nice, if they did make a sequel. And also, you know, I think the one missing ingredient from Max really is maturity. Like, that's why he's, you know, a bit unlikable in places, because he's not matured, but obviously maturity comes with age. So
yeah, he has not matured yet.
Yeah.
He's still maturing.
Yeah.
I guess the perfect circle for him would be if he got to teach at Rushmore, since he wants to be there forever. So that would be a cute little thing.
Yeah, so we like to kind of put a number on it and rate our films out of 10 on here. So should we move into that bit, Alan? Sure. Is there anything else you want to say before we do? No?
Nothing specific, I think. Yeah,
I'll let you start then, Alan. What would you give it out of 10?
Don't hold back. You don't have to be nice for me just because it's one of my favorites.
You know, this has been the interesting thing. Like, often when we have guests, we say, hey, choose a film. And they always pick a film they really like, obviously. So then when you don't like it, it's a bit like... But like I said earlier, I do like this film. I like Wes Anderson films in general. And I like that he's out there doing his thing. But it just never quite chimes with me. And I feel like this one should more than the others. I think I should. I do relate to this character on some levels, but then it just sort of falls down for me. And so I can't quite get that emotional hook into it. But like that, I've settled on a nice 7 out of 10 for that, because there's still so much to enjoy, and I do like the little quirky bits of humour and all that.
Okay, well, I'm basically the same as you, Alan. I actually did really enjoy it, and, you know, yeah, it just didn't quite connect with me on that personal level. But when I was watching it, I did think if I'd seen this at the right point in my life, I think it really would. So I completely understand why, you know, someone would like it.
I wish I'd seen this when I was 16,
but, yeah.
I wish that for both of you.
But I still enjoyed it. So I'm also giving it a 7 out of 10. You know, good. Good, solid 7.
I think Max would be happy to get a 7 out of 10 on a paper, so I think that's fair.
C, isn't it? It's a solid C.
And similarly, Allie, don't hold back with your rating. You know, go as high as you want.
Well, it's funny because I really do have so many different types of favorite movies. For example, some of my favorite movies to watch of all time are the ones that I also would probably give an 8, and that includes this. I would give this an 8, a very solid. I love this movie, but it's not in my, like, of all the films that exist, it's the best. But in terms of favorites, I love it so much. So it gives a very solid 8, if not an 8.5. Yeah. But for example, like Princess Bride and like Wayne's World and Spinal Tap and movies like that just make me feel good and are comforting. Like, those are the movies I love to put on. Like anything by Rob Reiner, really, I just love so much, and it's so fun. But for example, like movies that are on the Criterion channel that I'm watching recently end up scoring a little higher. But solid, I would say 8.5 for me.
Do you think Wes Anderson will ever get like drawn into making a Bond film or the next Avengers film or something like that, but just bring his own style?
The idea of a Marvel, you know, had it not been for WandaVision, I would immediately say no. But what they did with WandaVision was so unique that there's always room for some branching out in terms of a major brand. It would be very cool to see what his take on a big thing would be, because again, like, I do see a lot of similarities in Tim Burton's world. Like the idea of Tim Burton doing Batman at the time was like kind of like, whoa, really? And Michael Keaton? Like, are you kidding me? Mr. Mom is going to be Batman? You just don't know until it happens. That's one of the things I like most about watching the trajectory of people whose work I enjoy, kind of going along with the weird turns. And yeah, maybe Wes Anderson's getting tired of his own style and might pull something out of his hat, but we'll see.
He has spoken about doing a Bond film before, right? I don't know if there were ever any conversations about it actually happening, but he basically said my Bond film would be such a deconstruction of what James Bond is that they would never allow it. He said, it would open with Bond just saying to Moneypenny, look, what are we doing? Let's just go out for dinner, and him quitting the job or something. And so
I would love to watch that. I mean,
yeah, I would. I prefer that to any actual Bond movie I think I've ever seen, but yeah. Okay, yeah, so yeah, thanks so much, Allie. Is there anything you'd like to plug?
No, just follow me at Allie Goertz on Twitter, or go to my website, alliegoertz.com, for any updates and such. So far, it's mostly just enjoying my little quarantine. Also, listen to my podcast, Round Springfield. We have a couple of episodes. I'm not sure when this drops, but a couple of episodes coming out, or that will have just come out. And the final episode we're doing is with Matt Groening, and it's a 2-part episode, and it was really special. Hard to keep back the emotions of getting to talk to the guy himself. So very fun episode, and I really look forward to when that drops. So
Excellent.
That is something, because Matt Groening is famously very, very coy and doesn't do many interviews. He does keep to himself. Yeah.
First podcast he's ever done. We're really excited about it.
Cool. So yeah, thanks for listening, everyone, and come back for next. I'm so used to saying next week, but it's next fortnight. Come back for next episode.